There's a kind of pain that's hard to describe. It's one that doesn't come from being hated or ignored or dismissed, but more so from being admired. Admired without care, though, respected without intimacy, or being seen without being known. Now, this I know sounds like a contradiction. I mean, how could being praised hurt? How could being valued feel hollow? But therein is the paradox, right? See, some of us are celebrated constantly, celebrated for our strength, our clarity, our emotional intelligence, our dependability. The world calls us impressive, and our friends call us wise. Our families rely on us, and our colleagues tend to lean on us. And yet, deep down, there's this invisible wound, and that's that no one seems to actually care for us in a way that we quietly hope that they might. See, we become lighthouses for others. We shine brightly to help them find their way. But no one stops to ask who built the tower and who keeps the fire burning and what storms we've weathered while we're staying lit for others. And this is a lonely kind of survival, one that's masked by admiration. See, when others see us as capable, they usually stop checking in. When others see us as put together, they stop asking questions. And when others see us as strong and foundational, they tend to stop offering comfort. And over time, we start to feel like we don't even have permission to need these things. And that's where the damage begins. See, this is not about blaming others for their perceptions of us. The thing is, most people aren't intentionally neglectful. They just simply fall in love with the version of us that's been most useful to them. The version that shows up with the answers, the version that offers guidance, the version that rarely asks for anything back. And maybe we've helped that happen, right? Maybe we've trained them and the world to relate to us in that way. Not because we wanted to be invisible in our pain, but because we once learned that being needed was far safer than being vulnerable. And so we became useful. We became reliable and impressive. We tried to excel. But the thing is, it wasn't for real. See, the admiration came fast, but the intimacy, somewhere along the way, that just got lost. And that's the heart of this episode. Not the rejection we see coming, but the emotional emptiness that's hiding inside the praise. See, some of us, we know what it feels like to be applauded in rooms that are full of people who have no idea how lonely we are. They think they know us, but what they know is usually this curated version, the version that smiles through uncertainty, the version that offers wisdom while quietly we're unraveling, the version that listens without ever being listened to. So they know our performance, but not necessarily our person. And after a while, the pedestal starts to feel more like a prison. And what we needed was to be held, to be asked questions that didn't revolve around our capacity or our contributions, to be checked on, not when something was wrong, but simply because we matter. Not as a resource, but as a person. But we didn't get that, at least not consistently. And so we adjusted and we told ourselves, maybe this is what love looks like for me. Or maybe being respected is enough. Or worse, maybe this is all I deserve. See, there's no shame in having thoughts like these. Like, we think them to survive, to make sense of the emotional starvation that we did not know how to name in the first place. But now we're naming it. We're naming the cost of being everyone's strength. We're naming this quiet fatigue that comes from from being the one that people always turn to, but never really turn toward. And now we're also naming what it feels like to be known by reputation, but not by heart space. And so we're doing it not to shame anyone else, but more so to return to ourselves. Because if we're going to live with integrity, that real alignment between our inner truth and our outer life, we have to stop pretending that admiration is the same thing as care. They're not even close. Admiration is impressed by what we do, whereas care expresses curiosity about how we're really doing. Admiration quotes our insights, right? But care really asks about the grief that we feel and experience. Admiration relies on strength, whereas care makes space for our weakness. And the one really keeps us elevated, whereas the other keeps us more grounded. And we were made for grounding, I think, for presence and for connection. But it's hard to pursue that when really we've built our identity around being admired. See, if we're only ever affirmed for our capacity, it starts to feel dangerous to actually show our limitations. And if people were praising us for being emotionally available to them, it kind of starts to feel selfish to ask for the same thing in return. So we usually don't ask. We instead suppress, and we swallow, and we endure. And the world continues to reward our performance, never really noticing the parts of us that are quietly fading in the background. But something in us knows that this is not sustainable. This isn't what we were built for. And maybe we're just done being impressive if it means we can't actually feel whole. We often speak about burnout in terms of work and long hours and tight deadlines, too much output perhaps and not enough rest, right? But there's another kind of burnout that really gets named, and that's this burnout of emotional performance. The kind that happens when we're always on for others, when we carry the unspoken expectations that we will be okay, right? That we will be grounded and we will be available no matter what. So we become emotionally overextended. Not because people are malicious, right? But just because our system, the system of our relationships, well, it was never built for mutuality. It was actually built around us being the solid ones, the wise ones, the ones who are regulated, the ones who offer space and perspective and comfort. But where do we go when we need those things? Like, where do we go when we don't have it all figured out? It's terrifying to admit that we might not have anywhere to go at all. And so, instead of voicing that fear, we smile right through it. We nod when others thank us for our steadiness, even though inside we're quietly craving just someone to notice that we're not okay. We show up because that's what's expected, and we offer insight because it's what we've been praised for. We perform the role of being the emotionally mature person, while meanwhile there are parts of us that are just crying out to be held. There's a subtle trauma that builds when our needs are persistently overlooked. Not because they're invalid, but because they're invisible. And when invisibility becomes the norm, we start to internalize that invisibility. We start to believe that our vulnerability is too much, and that asking for support would inconvenience others, and that we really should be grateful for the admiration that we're getting, even if it leaves us cold and feeling isolated. But admiration that doesn't make room for our humanity is not a gift. This is just a trap. And we become characters in people's stories, we're the strong friend, or the healer, right? Or the one who always knows what to say. And at first, it feels flattering, but over time, it's suffocating. Because those roles are not whole. Those are fragments. They are projections. They are the safe containers where others put us in so that they don't have to deal with the messier truth. That we too are people and not props. And that we too have needs legitimately. See, this can create this profound dissonance between the way we're perceived and the way we actually feel. It's a kind of emotional imposter syndrome, if you will. It's like we start to feel fraudulent, like we're pretending to be fine because the image demands it, like we're performing stability, not actually living it. And then the guilt just creeps in. And we begin to shame ourselves for even feeling this way. Like, how can I complain? Or people respect me, like they admire me, they count on me. That should be enough, right? And really it's not. Because respect without relationship leaves one feeling hollow. Because admiration without intimacy leaves us feeling untouched. Because praise without presence is a poor substitute for love. And so the real work begins, not in changing how others see us, but in actually reclaiming how we see ourselves. See, we're not just what we offer. We're not just our capacity. We're not just our emotional labor. We are actually human beings with tender hearts and with quiet longings, with fears that we don't always understand, and with stories that we have yet to fully tell. We're with needs that don't make us weak, only make us real. And real is what we've really been starving for, right? So how do we get there? How do we begin to step off this pedestal that we've been on? Well, I think it starts in these small moments, these micro choices we get to choose along the way, like pausing before saying, I'm fine, and instead offering the more honest, actually, I'm figuring some things out right now, right? Like noticing when we default to being helpful, and then gently asking ourselves if that's coming from love or from fear. Like letting one safe person into the places we usually hide away. Not all at once, but just one doorway at a time. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be true. Because truth is the soil where intimacy grows, right? Not the glossy truth that we package for social media, but this messy and unfinished and inconvenient truth that lives beneath our surface. And yes, it's scary, especially if we've spent years being rewarded for our polished form, our professionalism, our perceived strength. But strength without softness is just armor. And armor, while useful in battle, is actually terrible for connection. We don't need to be invisible. We need to be held. And to be held, we have to be visible in our need. This does not mean that we collapsed into others or expect them to rescue us. It means instead that we dismantle the internal system that taught us that we are only worthy when we're admirable. It means that we start to tell a different story, a story that includes our pain, a story that honors our limits, a story that lets us be human again. Because the truth is, our worth was never in how well we held others. Our worth was actually in the fact that we too are worth holding as well. And maybe it's time that we started asking for that. One of the most painful realizations in this journey that we're on is that we often teach people how to treat us. Not because we're trying to be manipulative or calculating, but more so because we're also trying to survive. See, once upon a time we learned that if we kept showing up strong, we then wouldn't be a burden on others. That if we had all the answers, no one would leave then, right? And that if we made everyone around us feel seen, maybe someone would then eventually see us. But emotional connection does not work like that, does it? You can't actually barter your way into being cared for. You can't serve your way into being nurtured. And you can't carry everyone else and hope that someone will one day notice that your knees are shaking. The very traits that earned us admiration, which are like selflessness and wisdom and poise, they may have made us functionally invisible in our own lives. And so we actually may be surrounded by people who respect us, but don't necessarily know who we are. And sometimes, if we're honest, I think that's exactly what we're wanting, because being known feels dangerous. And if they saw how often we doubt ourselves, if they knew how often we felt alone, and if they heard this quiet pain in our chest that never really goes away, the question is, would they still admire us? Well, maybe not. And that's the trade-off that we've made. Protection over presence. Praise over vulnerability. But what if we were wrong on this? What if real connection only begins where the admiration ends? What if love does not arrive when we're our most impressive selves, but instead arrives when we're in our most honest state? See, this is where intimacy becomes more than just a concept. It becomes a practice. Not the kind that comes with flowers or candlelight, but the kind that requires courage in these micro moments we were earlier describing. The kind that whispers things like this. It says, let them see you. Not the performance, but the person underneath it all. See, we begin to practice by interrupting our cycles that we've been caught in sometimes for years. When someone says, you always seem to have it all together, maybe we could respond in that moment by saying, I really don't. I think I hide it well. And when a friend calls for advice but never checks in on you, maybe pause and say, hey, before we dive into your stuff, could I maybe share something that I've been carrying for some time now? And when you notice yourself maybe disappearing into service, where you're always helping and always listening, right? Maybe in that moment ask, what would it be like for me to let someone show up for me? See, these are small pivots, but they aren't just about getting our needs met. They're actually about telling the truth of our existence. They're about refusing to stay hidden behind the mask that we've been wearing of competence. And they're more about integrity, this sacred alignment of who we are and how we live in this world. Because the longer that we go unseen, the more disconnected we become from others and from ourselves and from the parts of us that once hoped for more. And yes, there's grief in all of this. There's deep, old grief. Grief for the ways that we were taught to stay small. Grief for the times that we hinted at our pain and we were met with silence. There's grief for these relationships that looked like connection, but were in reality built on performance. And so we have to make room for this grief, not to wallow in it, but to honor it, to recognize the cost of being admirable and how legitimate that is, and how it's left marks, and how it's shaped our nervous system and our habits and our expectations of love. But grief, when met with gentleness, it can become fertile ground. It becomes the place where new connections can begin, where we stop over-functioning and instead start to reveal more about who we are and what it means to be really in our experience. It's where we stop earning and start belonging. Where we choose to stop being the emotional infrastructure for everyone else and finally take up space in our own story. And yes, this, like, not everyone is going to respond well to this shift. Some are going to be confused. And many may also miss this old version of you, the version that never asked and never needed and never really pushed back. But listen, that's okay. Let them miss who we were, because we are becoming who we actually are. And who we are is someone who's worthy of care, not just admiration. It's someone who doesn't have to be profound all the time to be lovable. It's someone who doesn't have to be productive just to be worth staying for, right? It's someone whose heart matters, even when it's messy, even when it's quiet, even when it's asking for something more. See, this reorientation doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, and sometimes that slow is painfully slow, but it's real and it's necessary, because we're not meant to perform love. We're actually meant to experience it. Not from a distance, not through applause, but up close in softness and in mutual care. This is the work of returning to ourselves, of remembering what we were made for, and of trusting that we don't have to choose between being admirable and being loved. But if we do have to choose, let's choose love. Let's choose the truth of being fully seen, even though that's one of the scariest things you've done. Let's choose the risk of letting someone witness the parts of us that they usually hide. That's courageous, because this is the space in which we heal. This is where we no longer are alone. These are the places where we finally can breathe deeply and exhale freely. There's this soft and quiet revolution that happens when we decide to stop earning our place in the world. It may not be a loud rebellion. It's not really a dramatic undoing of sorts, but it's just a moment, and then another moment, where we choose to show up without the armor of admiration. It's where we risk being underwhelming in a culture that's obsessed with performance, where we take the costume and say, this costume no longer fits me. This is the real me, not the impressive me, just the genuine me. This is where intimacy can begin. Not in admiration, but in authenticity. And yes, this is uncomfortable, especially at first, because there's safety, isn't there, in being impressive. There's protection there in being the one who holds space, the one who shows up, and the one who's always knowing what to say. That role really kept us alive all this time. And it built bridges, yes. It earned trust, but it also cost us, didn't it? It cost us our emotional freedom. So when we become the container for everyone else's mess, but no one really knows how to hold ours, this is a space where we start to believe that our needs are shameful, and that our pain is excessive, and that our desire is to be seen as some kind of failure. When in reality, it is not. It's just beautifully human. It's the essence of being alive, to want to be witnessed, and not only for our usefulness, but really for our soul, our essence. So what now, my dear listener? Now we practice. We practice reaching out before we hit our bottom. We practice letting our voice tremble in conversation when we practice authenticity and truth-telling. And we practice naming our limits even when it risks disappointing someone else. And we practice receiving, not just giving. We practice saying, I'm not okay, and letting the silence that follows that be honest and not necessarily just awkward. And if the people around us don't know what to do with that, we learn not to shrink. We learn not to apologize. We don't double back to being something more digestible by suppressing ourselves. We breathe and we grieve and we keep showing up in our truth, even when we have to find new people to do that with. Because here's what we've learned. Being admired is not the same thing as being loved. And being needed is not the same thing as being cherished. And being strong is not the same thing as feeling safe. And we are not willing to trade real connection for polished performance anymore. We're done with that. See, this is not a rejection of the parts of us that can hold space. It's not a rejection of those parts that can show up strong and that offer wisdom. See, those parts are beautiful, yes, but they're not all of us. And when they become the only parts that people see, it leaves us in this fractured state. It leaves us feeling lonely and it leaves us feeling invisible. So we're learning in these slow and courageously brave ways to bring the rest of ourselves to the surface. Not all at once and not everywhere, but in places where it's safe. We're learning to invite people into our inner world, not just in our outer brilliance. And we're learning to trust that being soft does not make us any less. We're learning that care, when it's real, will never require us to perform for it. And maybe the most vulnerable of all this, we're learning to offer that kind of care to ourselves first, the kind that doesn't ask us to be admirable, but honest, only human, and only present and here. Because when we begin to care for ourselves with that kind of integrity and that kind of intimacy, we stop settling for relationships that feed on our strength but starve our hearts. And instead we start choosing connections that actually nourish our soul. The ones that hold us, the ones that listen and linger. And that doesn't just leave us in the gutter. See, this kind of care stays long after the applause dies down. And over time, we begin to realize that we were never too much. We were just too real for the people who only knew how to love our performance. But now, we're done with that, aren't we? We're done shrinking to fit their comfort. We're done contorting, if you will, into the roles that erase our needs. And we're done trading our truth for admiration. We want to be known. We want to be held. We want to be met, not for what we do as much as for who we are. Not for how well we've held it together, but just for the sacred fact that we are here, breathing and longing and becoming. And that, my dear listener, is enough. Let me know in the comments how this episode found you. I'd love to hear your insights, your anecdotes. Leave them in the comments below.